Dear conference team, dear participants, I am thankful, happy and excited to provide the keynote for this conference and welcome all of you to start our session by briefly introducing thoughts on the title terms embedded and embodied. From here, we visit the artistic research project Visions for People, which was a cooperation between the Art Academy Kunsthochschule Berlin-Weißensee and the Clinic for Psychiatry and Psychotherapy Charité Berlin-Mitte. The conclusions drawn from Visions for People reflected back into academia and caused changes in teaching and learning. Finally, we will open the session for unmuting you and getting interactively connected. So let's start with Madeness. This title might sound unknown to you, unsurprisingly, as it is a neologism. Madeness is made. I took it from make to made to madeness. The title oscillates between madeness and madness, especially as we will be talking about a project in psychiatry. But here we touch the main topic interspersing the keynote, our madeness and our makings, of course. And now we can get into the conference title terms. Mind, embedded, embodied. And we start from the back. Embodied. While at first glance one might think that this term refers to bodies, it rather hints at subjects that are embodied, theories, ideologies, thoughts, desires. It does not lead to the matter that embodies. It does not lead to the bodies. Nevertheless, I will pronounce the making of embodiment, and by asking the bodies that perform embodiment, the agents will appear. They can be texts, images, things, actions, gestures, any form of articulations, or living bodies. For this conference of psychological anthropology and as various science fields have recently rediscovered our minds as being embodied, I will focus on human bodies as the agents performing embodiment. It seems that almost no thing or object has been more exposed to cultural, societal, political, and other inscriptions, measures of control, punishments and threats as the human body. Starting with Foucault and Deleuze and Guattari, Haraway and Butler, especially in the fields of philosophy, sociology, and gender studies, an immense number of papers on human embodiments and its societal relations have emerged, and I am sure in your fields of knowledge as well. Therefore, I would now like to draw your attention to the human body as the body of inscriptions, but not to the inscriptions, and ask who or what has been excluded, neglected, or hidden by omitting the bodily component in theoretical discourse about the human being. We find bodies of people who have been and still are devaluated and deprived of human rights because of bodily components. People of color, indigenous people, people with colonial backgrounds whose rights have been disregarded for centuries and still are, bodies of people in war zones, people who live in geographically or communally precarious regions, bodies suffering from malnutrition and lack of access to drinking water, bodies exposed to toxic conditions like contaminated water, air and soil, bodies of people whose systematic exploitation and work under inhumane conditions result in chronic diseases and shorter life expectancies, bodies of people who are banned, excluded, and discriminated against because of their sexual orientations, bodies of people who are female, who get mutilated, disregarded, and still do not experience equal treatment, and as the list continues, all people whose bodies do not fit the incessantly mediated, forced globalized standards of health, beauty, and body images, and therefore are treated pejoratively. The list also includes the frail, vulnerable, exhausted, abused, aching, sick, challenged, unsheltered, dirty, infected, tortured, dismembered, the killed, hijacked, disappeared, dying and dead bodies. We are not talking about minorities here, the majority of people on this planet belongs at least to one of the mentioned groups. And by voicing the bodies and not what they embody, they come to our minds. Now I ask, what conditions of human beings have been discussed without getting aware of their embodiment? It must have been quite an abstract interrogation, including idealizations of the discussed matters. The human being, the body, the mind, the embodiment, the embedding. To make up for the gross neglect that might occur and disconnect us from our embodiments and the conditions we are embedded in, namely our worldly presence, I suggest the pluralization that puts the terms into perspective. Human beings, bodies, minds, embodiments, embeddings, thus also making visible and audible that we are dealing with multiplicities. But how do the bodies embody the forces that inscribe theories, ideologies, or desires on them? They disclose the foreclosed, exhibit was what was meant to be inhibited, unveil the veiled. The forces appear in and on body parts, organs, tissues, fluids, as wounds, scars, deformations, mutilations, dislocations, traces of violence and violations, signs, signals, stories that might be illegible, unreadable, undecipherable, but claiming, showing, witnessing as non-discursive material, deeds done. Embodiments reach down into the nanosphere, hybridizations, chimeras, viruses, gene transfers, mutants, synthetically designed biological entities, parts and particles, codes, cut, merged, and recombined, creating new species, new drugs, our recombined corona vaccines, interacting with human bodies around the planet, if available. Each body is deeply rooted in essential, diversified, and contradictory landscapes of cultural, historical, political, hegemonic, and physical embeddings. And here we arrive at the second title term. As a derivative of the bed, the term suggests a comfortable stay that adapts to the needs of the embedded being and even provides for rest and regeneration. Body in bed sounds so relaxing. Here I belong, please do not disturb. But the metaphor is deceptive. Far from being just a bed, an embedding is an active component that in fact invades or assimilates its object, defines its destiny, performs an appropriation of space, time, and content. As embeddings are unluckily often justified by mock-up scientific reasoning and consolidated by theories that persist merely because they have been handed down over centuries as common cultural consensus, appearing like given facts, naturalizations, traditions. They are but made by men and have been traded and deliberately inscribed and forced upon the respective bodies, peoples, and lives. Every embedding defines and modifies its content. Discovering the madeness of circumstances, structures, and embeddings also means that they could be different. Therefore, this awareness calls for making a change. And with this little intro in mind, we can now move on to visit the artistic research project, Visions for People. As mentioned, Visions for People started out as a collaboration between an art school and a psychiatric clinic. It was originally designed as an artistic educational endeavor, but soon it challenged basic assumptions and routines of thinking and acting. Artistic research might be an uncommon field of knowledge production to some of you, so I will give a short 3-slide input on the project's embedding. And I start with a quote by Jacques Rancière. If art is but a mode of perception, also artistic research must be the mode of a process. Therefore, there can be no categorical distinction between scientific and artistic research, because the attributes independently modulate a common carrier, namely the aim for knowledge within research. Artistic research can therefore always also be scientific research. For this reason, many artistic research projects are genuinely interdisciplinary, specifically indisciplinary, unquote. Artistic research topics and methods for investigating can be selected from all fields of human activity and will be compiled for the specific projects. Their structures might not follow the classical linear structure of scientific studies, but apply spiraling, self-reflective constructions. Gilles Deleuze, who had a strong impact on artistic research, thought of art, and now I quote Anne Savagnac, literature as a clinic that complements or corrects medicine, for it situates itself at the level of a symptomatology of real effects, rather than an etiology of abstract causes, unquote. According to Deleuze, artistic activity does not consist of a production of aesthetic forms, but instead of capturing the forces that permeate our bodies and societies. The assembling, disclosing, and displaying of these forces allow intensifications, subverting stereotypes and cliches, and thus unleashing political power through the artwork. A reason for the interest in artistic research from other research fields, but also for the challenges in transdisciplinary projects, is provided by the following quote, again by Anne Savagnac. But the image is not a statement, and according to Deleuze's distinction, requires semiotics and not semantics, that is, a theory of non-discursive science that is not content to duplicate the rhetorics of signification or to imitate linguistic operations. Semiotics defines itself as a system of images and signs, independent of language in general. Hence the difficulty of an analysis of the non-discursive arts, for it is necessary to learn in discourse what is not derived by it, and to extract thought from a signaletic, non-linguistic matter that is nevertheless not amorphous, but semiotic, unquote. Artistic thinking and acting might be initiated by different perceptions, capture different aspects of our complex realities, and choose different paths compared to those of classical knowledge production. And this was the case with Visions for People. And now we plunge into the project. And as you already know, Visions for People was a cooperation between the Clinic of Psychiatry and Psychotherapy Charité Berlin-Mitte, which you see here on the slide, and the Art Academy Kunsthochschule Berlin-Weißensee, and included higher degree students from 8 art and design disciplines, gathering empirical knowledge on site in direct exchange with the patients of the psychiatric clinic. The input formed a basis for artistic or participatory designs intending to positively contribute to the recovery process. The people, namely the patients for whom the institution originally was, or should have been, created, were the most important communication partners. These contacts were the starting points for visions that were transformed into artistic projects. From the 28 methods and practices performed during the project, I will mention the 3 most essential steps that changed the project's development and produced an overarching impact extending into academia. First change, waiving questionnaires from applying to creating or to make. In preparation for joint visits, some students had drafted specific questionnaires for the patients. To our surprise, the patients anonymously waived the prefabricated questions or filled them in with absurd comments. They told us that they would be very happy to spend time with us, but they were not willing to fill in forms or answer predefined questions. Also, they'd rejected taped interviews and live notations with a computer. They explained that they had been the objects for analysis and data retrieving in countless ways. They were tired of it. And despite all efforts to distribute their knowledge, no condition had improved so far. They also asked us back lots of questions. When they found out that we were from an art school and not involved in the healthcare system, there was a palpable relief. Intense and open-hearted discussions commenced with topics determined by the patients. We talked about politics, professions, philosophy, treatment, medication, roles, stigmatization, boredom, future, art, the sense of life, food, family, money, and so on. This experience encouraged us to drop prefabricated formats, and we performed informal, individual exchanges and open communication with the patients and the staff. The second change, from reporting to narrating. Instead of writing field research reports, we produced what we called scape research narratives. The researcher was integrated as a first-person speaker instead of their objective elimination and passive wordings. This allowed individual perspectives to appear and to be compared and analyzed in a multi-layered manner. The third change, from talking to acting, or cooperating, collaborating, making. As the patients were happy talking to us and meeting us, they also told us they would very much like to do something with us. We prepared joint activities, and I'm going to show you two examples. The first one was the balloon session. We brought helium and balloons and pumped up the balloons in the clinic and offered them to the patients, who attached wishes or letters to them. Later in the afternoon, we let them fly in the Berlin sky. Second example, we created a dark room and brought LED lights. The patients could what they called paint with light, as my assistant took photos of the colorful movements. Very surprising and intense moments occurred. And the following week, we brought the photos back to them as printouts, and they were really proud and fascinated by their own makings. Some patients started cooperating with some students, and some visited the project rooms. Suggestions, methods, problems, and solutions were exchanged. The planned interrogation had transformed into a shared experience and shared artistic production. This development initiated the idea of extending and transforming the project so that the patients would decide the outline what a psychiatric clinic should be composed of. I could convince the head of the clinic, Professor Heinz, and we sent out a request to the Senate for an extension of 1 year. Unfortunately, it was never answered. Now the outcomes. 19 concrete yet extremely different results were produced by 24 students and some patients, but we are not allowed to name them, during Visions for People, and presented to the public and the patients and staff in 2 exhibitions. As I cannot show all contributions here, these titles and telegram descriptions might give you an idea of what was realized. The list starts with artistic contributions for the gardens of the psychiatry. We had 4 gardens, proceeding into the situations inside the building, like the floors, waiting rooms, and bedrooms, and leading to system-immanent questions about diagnosis or therapies, and to intra- and interpersonal states of mind. I will show you 3 slides as examples. We Are the Universe by Paola. The planned garden installation consists of movable full and half spheres painted in mother-of-pearl color. The patients would be able to use, sit on, lie on, move around, and arrange the spheres according to their personal preferences. Smaller spheres would be attached to the trees and inspire for imagination about the sphere's origins. Second example, Shelter by Johanna Taubenreuter. Shelter was designed to reduce the internal and external tension that arises during longer stays in multi-bedrooms in the psychiatric wards. The organic membrane combines luminous, sound-absorbing, and sight-protecting elements. Like an extended gesture, it can express the need to delineate one's own territory or to open one's space to others. And the third and last example, You Are My Window by Eric Kubo. You Are My Window was an installation and performance based on interviews with individuals on the topics of vulnerability. In a complex storytelling performance, the self-image of the artist intertwined with the self-images of the interviewed people. The artist recited passages of experiences, at times turning into a singing mode, and accompanied them with body movements, actions, sounds, and light changes. In 2019, the publication Visions for People was released with Jovis Verlag. The narration shifts from a chronotopical listing of methods and practices to investigating challenges and complex situations. The reader can revisit the psychiatry and immerse into the experiences via quotes from the scape research narratives and images. The authorship extends from a single speaker to a polyphony of narrations and project outcomes. Visions for People provides experience values and working methods for similar projects in psychiatric or public institutions. Whoop, one moment. Now, I got it. Now, challenges. Visions for People led in the field of psychiatry to a critical questioning of the approaches of design thinking, participatory design, or artistic and research activities. In our assessment, the use of methods such as prefabricated questionnaires and ready-made interaction kits build up and maintain a distance that prevents the initiators from getting in contact with the people they want to know something about. The researchees and the researchers' roles remain restricted by the tools, channeling the contact and predefining the outcomes. If the participatory method is reduced to filling in forms, the activity is data extraction and not participation. The notion of social participation is no more than lip service if the study's design does not offer options for participating in decision-making processes for the respective parties. The question is always, however, who initiates these processes out of what interest? In the worst case, and now I quote Marcus Meeson, participation is used as a veiled tactic to increase profitability, unquote. So here I ask, who decides about the madeness of projects? With Visions for People, I experienced scenes that could have escaped a bestiary of our neoliberal capitalist embedding. From a long list, I present you 2 beasts. Unfortunately, you might know them too. Beast number 1, / make people work with a mutilated project version. 1/3 of the time and 2/3 of financing were cut for Visions for People. This seems to be a routine. Projects are only granted in slashed modes, triggering work overload for each participant and friction during conduct. This causes a structural shortage of time. But changes take time, and the shortage of time means that nothing changes. Beast number 2, absorb, keep people busy, complicate processes, request, detour, retard, absorb energy. Example, a corporation draft was being incessantly forwarded to ever new offices, its growing email tail accumulating ever new restrictions and desires. After occupying us for months on end, the bloated conglomerate miraculously died a quiet death in some office and was never mentioned again. And by the way, we finished the project without a contract. Now, more challenges and the conclusion. Working in transdisciplinary context means to encounter your own narrowed viewpoints and find out about structural rules and restrictions and make aware of these. Science is not the only source for knowledge production, but part of it, and a large part of it, with a strong emphasis on analytic activities. A scientific disclosure, for example, of destructive practices usually does not actively extend into the improvement of situations. That means that the effect for the field that was data extracted remains slim. And now I quote Marion Hamm, "Not all authors express this in such a decisive form as Walcott in 2005, who declares outright the researcher has nothing to offer to the field, and points out that research is ultimately of use, especially for the researcher themselves," unquote. It might be time to extend the field of responsibilities and create a praxeology that offers contributions for the investigated people. End the one-way street, so to speak, and create feedback loops. The 6 words, from being affected to getting involved, outline the conclusion of visions for people. They do not only refer to the patients, but also to the psychiatrists, psychologists, therapists, or researchers' roles, and are of course not restricted to the field of psychiatric communities. In awareness of the madeness of structures, I learned to ask, what am I actually making? Who am I making it for? Is my making helpful to those who are affected by it? Are their voices heard? And if not, how can I make them heard? Do they have the power to decide? And if not, who is making it for them? And after investigating psychiatry's needs and desires and underlying structures, I turned around and asked, how about my own institutional embedding? I traced back the roots of educational institutions. Weren't they initially made for the students? Why then do the students not have the power in decision-making processes? Who are the ones that are making the decisions? Would one of them be me? What are we really teaching? Do the contents and methods we teach still meet the needs and awarenesses of actual developments, conflicts, desires? How are we actually teaching? Do we teach how to learn? Why don't we learn how to learn as a joint constant process? Learning procedures are made. They can change. How would a structure look like that makes the shift from being affected to getting involved within academia? I drafted a project called Human Subjects for 103 first semester students during the lockdown in winter 2020. The title refers to human subjects or issues that emerged during the year 2020, but also concerns the human subjects as being both initiators and victims of their anthropocentric makings. The heart of the project was a bilingual, anonymous survey with 7 questions offering open text fields for the students to comment on in their own style on the year 2020, a deliberately vague term to enable a wide spectrum of responses. The results, compiled in an alphabetical order, became the source material from which each student could choose a topic to generate an individual artistic outcome. Thus, the decision-making process moved to the students. We had 6 student groups who attended the courses subsequently. Finally, I merged the 6 groups' alphabets into one large analphabet. An alphabet, as the alphabet was subverted by the bilinguality with jumping terms like Auge with an A and Eye with an E, meaning the same, that would pop up at different parts of the alphabet. The analphabet compiles the students' perspectives on the year 2020. It also became the backbone to which the artistic contributions will be docked, transforming the analphabet into a rhizomatic structure, including non-discursive material and offering multiple ways of reception. The concept was a first important step to modify the teaching and learning structure. Now the students actively created the pool of topics that they would be able to choose from. The students also decided about the media and genres that would embody their concepts. Intense discussions commenced, and some students created joint contributions. Online, of course, with the students stuck in their single-room flats. Other students struggled with deciding on a topic and genre, as they were not used to making decisions, but rather expected to be given tasks to fulfill, as they had done for so many years in school. I accompanied the processes and productions in individual and group meetings, of course also online. The challenge is to make ground for exhibition, for experiences, agency, and research to take place. To allow space-time for improving energy flows among the respective people, to create new avenues and options for knowledge production. Finally, I quote Anselm Franke's clue about how to make a change in an institution. It begins with the sensing of absence, getting aware of what has been constitutively foreclosed. And when you bring something back that was excluded, it bears the force of unbelonging that cannot be pacified. So let us now turn to our actual embodiments and embeddings. This conference, shaped by and embedded in the pandemic environment still, means that we participate as disembodied, socially distanced, separated, connected, psychophysical, presence absences, at times frozen or disconnected, gazing at screens or monologuing before muted recipients, connected by unsafe platforms, digitalized, wired or wireless, re-embodied by pixels and frequencies. The perspectives of embeddings and embodiments make us face our own restricted ways of perception, fragile connections, and our frightening, precarious vulnerabilities. And now let us shift from being affected to getting involved and start our exchange with unmuted interactions. I thank you for your attention.